Good morning. You're listening to the Blaine's World show heard here each Wednesday on WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVM.org and watch on WPVM's Facebook page. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed Edelson. And welcome aboard, Ed.
Thank you.
Okay, Ed, you'll hear a little bit about him. But before we begin, Ed, I highlight your background. If you want to just wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world, you can say hello to everybody who's watching. Okay, I should mention that Ed is a real kick to be speaking with him because he and I went to Lawrence High School in Cedarhurst, New York together. And we both graduated, what was it, 1942, was it, or 43?
Don't push it. 67.
67. Anyway, Ed then graduated from Cornell University and the Kennedy School of Government through Harvard. He had a corporate career with ExxonMobil Corporation before starting, and this was amazing to me, Ed, that you started as a B&B innkeeper in Southbury, Connecticut in 2004. In 2011, I guess you were bored, so you decided to run as mayor or first selectman and served 2 terms. Well, for first selectman, he collaborated with Rabbi Polakov and Reverend Wall to produce a documentary film about the events in Salisbury in 1937 when they confronted by German-American Bund. And that seems inspired organization to build their largest training camp. The film premiered in 2002. Subsequently, he then brought the film to the attention of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And while at the opening, he then decided to write the story as a good fit for an illustrated children's book, 3rd to 5th grade. And Ed, that kind of background just overwhelms me. But what's amazing about it is that he kept moving into different areas. What is it? Sometimes I have that happen a little bit too. Did you get bored easily? Was that it, or what happened?
I think there's some of that I always like a new challenge, and or maybe it's more running away from things. I don't know. It's one or the other, push or pull. But
when you were in Lawrence High School with me, and Ed was the editor of the yearbook, I was editor of the paper. Did you always know that you wanted to be this kind of guy with this eclectic background, to be a bed and breakfast run a bed and breakfast, to be an author, to be a filmmaker, to do all these different things? Did you have any idea when you were a kid what you wanted to do?
Well, I think I went to some of these like aptitude things. I think we had it where you would take this test and would say, oh, you should be this. And I think what I was told, I was good in math, I should be an engineer.
Right.
So I actually went to, initially I went to Tufts University in the engineering school. And it wasn't a good fit, but I was told that's what I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be an engineer. And it didn't work out that way. But I thought I was sort of predestined based on high school. That's your path. You will be an engineer. I didn't even really know what it meant to be an engineer. I was just told you have the right fit for being an engineer. So I think I've been very lucky that I've had lots of different opportunities, and so far it's all worked out.
So when did you switch, or why did you switch majors? And when did you switch majors?
Well, those were pretty tough times, Blaine, 1968, 69. So I was having a lot of trouble at Tufts. My mother said I majored in extracurricular activities. And so by my junior year, so that was 69, and if you remember, that was a pretty tumultuous year, I withdrew. And I had the dream of going west. Tufts, as you know, is outside of Boston. And I made it to Stamford, Connecticut. And that's where I met my wife. And we worked at a place for a while, and then we both got fired. And I said, well, I really wanted to go a little further west. So then we made it out to Colorado. And I think being out there on my own, I mean, clearly with my wife, I sort of got a little bit better sense of what it was I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And that's when I came back to Cornell, graduated from there, and then went on to a varied career. I thought I would be in government service. Quite honestly, I worked actually for a couple of years for the national laboratories. A lot of people have heard of Jet Propulsion Laboratory or Department of Energy laboratories. But then Ronald Reagan came along, and working for the federal government all of a sudden didn't seem like a stable way to raise a family, because he wanted to get rid of the Department of Energy. So then I started another direction, and that's when I went to ExxonMobil.
And you were with Exxon for a bunch of years, right?
Right, about 22, 23.
And what did you do with them?
Well, I usually say anything they asked me to do, but it was a very varied career. I started actually in financial systems development. Then I was corporate planning in New York, which was pretty interesting. But then moved down to Florida to their Latin America affiliate. And a lot of that was driven, it was an opportunity given to me, but my parents were living in Florida, and they had never been close to proximity wise to our children. And so being able to be in Florida with my parents and so they could be with their grandchildren meant a lot. But I ended up really working in all kinds of roles in the Caribbean and Latin America. So I did a lot of automation, because it was pretty backwards the way the Caribbean was run then, and public affairs, marketing, and eventually became what they call a general manager of Bermuda. A lot of overseas assignments, people will tell you about the stress and strain of working in Saudi Arabia, and they actually put years onto your career because of the hazard duty. And what we said about Bermuda, it puts years back on your life because it's so calm and peaceful.
And that's funny, because I think I bumped back into being in touch with you right around that time, or the end of your career with Exxon, because all of a sudden Facebook came into being, and then I read about you on Facebook, and we're in a same high school. We have a high school page, a Lawrence High School page, and all of a sudden I see you running a bed and breakfast. So that was quite a shift from Exxon corporate to running a bed and breakfast. How did you get into doing that?
Well, some of it was really Bermuda. We ended up with a really nice house there, and you wouldn't believe it, but a lot of people wanted to come visit us. I didn't know I had so many cousins. So, and I would say most sane people would say the worst thing they could imagine is waking up in the morning and finding a stranger in their house, or somebody, not a direct family member. But I really loved the idea of waking up and finding new people to talk to in the morning, or as well as the evening, obviously. And we never charged it. We usually did it, to help out nonprofits. We would offer like an auction item, very
nice
typical type of thing, and come spend a week in Bermuda. And we got to meet nice people and show them around so that kind of stuck in our heads. And then we moved back to the States from Bermuda, and it was just, in that point, all our children were out of the house. It was just the two of us, and we sort of missed having people around. So we started looking all over. We looked actually in Asheville for a bed and breakfast, and Tri-Cities. I said to my wife very clearly, I said, it's got to be south of Virginia or further south, because I don't want to go back to cold weather like Cornell. And so I put my foot down, and you see how successful I was at that.
And mention too, so Ed right now is in Connecticut. Right. And so then you just bought or started a bed and breakfast.
Well, it was a historic house built in 1818, and stayed within basically the same family almost for, I think it was like 170 years. And then in like 1997, a woman bought it. Oh, I shouldn't say, well, anyway, it got converted into a bed and breakfast. In other words, the bedrooms, it had like one bathroom. Well, now it had, I think it was 7 bathrooms, and made all the different bedrooms. So somebody put a lot of work into refurbishing the house to be a bed and breakfast. We did a lot more ourselves. And it went through a couple of owners, and then it had been vacant for about a year, and we bought it. And that was basically in 2004, and we kept at it till 2016.
Okay, wow. So the experience with that, that must have been a shift for you, because at the same time too, which always impressed me, you were also getting into your political career, right? You around that time when you're running bed and breakfast, you were also a local politician.
Well, I got involved. I very much got involved in the community. Whether it was serving on boards and commissions, Inland Wetlands Commission was a big thing here, Board of Finance, as well as the Historic Society and the local Democratic Committee. And I eventually became the chair of that committee. As we say, the easiest thing to become is the president of a nonprofit organization.
I know it well, exactly.
If you get go to scratch your head, you want to be the president? You raised your hand. So I did a lot, and I got to the point where I want to put this a nice way, but I got offended how the Republicans felt entitled. And actually, if you read a lot of political history, I remember reading Tip O'Neill's book once about how even in Boston, Democrats got to the point where they felt entitled to be elected, and they didn't really work for it. And it's never good if one political party is so dominant that they no longer have that check and balance, which I think is one of the geniuses of the founding fathers. And we just couldn't get anybody elected. The Democrats just couldn't get anybody elected. And I was ready to close up and say, why have a committee if we can't get anybody elected? And as a result, people were saying, well, why would I run if I know I can't get elected? So I sort of said, well, I'm going to show people that we can do it. As if I can't do it, then I should really shut up. Right. So that's how that campaign came about. And it was quite an experience. As I say, it's the most difficult job interview I've ever done. In a sense of there are, like at that time, 13,000 voters. You have to convince a majority of them that you're the right person for the job. Most job interviews I've ever done was like 3 or 4 people that you had to talk to.
That's a shame. I would have thought, and I'm sure you were good at it, but as you were telling me off there, it's kind of a thankless task in general, Now, on top of that, when you're trying to get something done and everybody's pulling in a different direction, so it's kind of ironic though, because it seemed as you got out of your political career, you got into this whole then career of telling a storyteller. And let's talk about that story, because in our remaining time, just kind of an amazing story. And I'm curious, first of all, how did you learn about it? And we'll talk about it. It's a story based on your hometown now, Salisbury. That's where you are.
Southbury, yes.
I'm sorry, Southbury. And so what was the story? And tell us about how you heard about it.
Sure. Well, again, we lived in this historic house and as the B&B. And within like the first week of being there was a woman named Joyce Hornbecker who had been the town clerk, but had become an unofficial town historian. And she'd retired, but this was her passion. And she came to the house and she introduced herself and said, your house was involved with this story about the Nazis. Well, as a Jew from Long Island, I mean, you got my interest, tell me more. And she said, well, why don't you come to one of my talks that I do periodically? And I don't remember if it was the next week or it was pretty soon after that. And she kind of gave a little snippet of what happened in 1937. And that clearly got my attention. And so I started telling the story to people who came to the bed and breakfast. And then about 3 or 4 years later, Rabbi Polikoff, who was the rabbi at the Jewish Center in Southbury, which did not exist in 1937, he was doing a program about Darfur and the genocide in Darfur. And as part of that, he had done a little more research on this story. And as he would say, he put his first PowerPoint presentation together, and it had more pictures. He'd gone to the local newspaper, done some archival work, and he really fleshed out the story a lot more. And I said, this is really a much better story than I understood. And I started working with him. And actually, I took his PowerPoint presentation and I just took it as is and made a movie of it and put it out on YouTube. And I think, it never went viral. And I think we only got one anti-Semitic comment about it. But in the back of my mind, I kept saying to Rabbi, we need to make a movie about this. This cries out to be a movie. And then a couple of years went by, and the South Britain Congregational Church brought a new minister to town, and or they called a new minister, and she ended up staying at our bed and breakfast, and that was Reverend Wall. And I immediately said to her, "Oh, do you know about what happened in 1937?" And she said, "No, no one ever told me about this." So I told her the story, and she began to do a lot more research on herself, by herself. And I would, every time I saw Shannon Wall, I said, "Oh, we got to make a movie out of this." So I get elected in November of 2011. And I know what, as you know, or can you surmise, to make a movie, you need some money. So I didn't have money to do that. Neither did Shannon or Rabbi Eric. So the three of us ended up being, because I'd been elected, I was asked to come to an interfaith Thanksgiving celebration or service. And the three of us were there at the end and talking to each other. And Rabbi Polikoff said, this is going to become, next year will be the 75th anniversary. And I said, well, if ever there was a time to make this movie, now's the time to do it. And a lot of that was because of our interest in oral history. I mean, we still knew there were some people who remembered this. They might have been young, but they remembered this story, or they'd heard it very much directly from their parents. None of us had ever done a film. We had no idea what we were committing to, but we said by the time in 2012, when the pivotal event, which is this sermon by the two congregational ministers happened, which was right around Thanksgiving time, that's when we're going to premiere the movie. So we had our end date, but we had no money, and we really had no knowledge of how to make a film.
This sounds a little like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Let's get together and make a film,
right?
And do it in one. And you have, by the way, talk about how then you'd never done a film before, and you had the end date. How did you learn about the whole process?
Trial and error and a lot of luck. I think some of it was because of my position. I never said, I wanted to keep it clear of politics, but I was able to tap into a lot of people to make donations. And so we were able to raise money. At one point, though, we really didn't have, so that was one part, was raising the money. Luckily, in town, there was a film producer or a director, Scott Sniffen, who I didn't know, but other people did know. And he was, he did an amazing job in the very little time that he had. So we were lucky to find him. I think if we hadn't found him, I'm not sure how it would have all worked out. And then at one point, we didn't have enough money to pay him. And I said, I believe in this so much, I will guarantee it. I never told Christine, my wife, about that, but I said, we're going to raise the money. I think we'd raised like $6,000 at that time, and we knew we needed like 11. And I said, I'm good for the 5. Because at that point, I really believed in the story, and when I could just feel that there was something right about it, and the town really needed this story. And I guess, the proof in that pudding was, and I don't know if you know this part, but we thought we'd premiere it at Town Hall. That was free.
I think that was in the documentary. I thought I heard that somewhere, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, in the second documentary, it talks about how that we filled up the high school auditorium, which was, instead of 100 people, 150 people at Town Hall, we had to turn people away from the 900-seat auditorium at the high school. And I remember saying, when I first heard about this from Joyce, I thought that's a pretty good story. And then when I heard Rabbi Polikoff do it, I said, no, this is a great story. And then when I saw the crowd out there and their reaction, I said, well, this is really an important story. And that's why I'm, thrilled that I was able to be a part of it.
I'm getting a chill as to describe it, because again, Ed, I saw the documentary, and then what was really exciting, Ed, was the follow-up, to talk about when it was released. And it must have been, for you, must have been some emotional moment, when you get 900 people at this labor of love. That must have been a great thing.
Oh, it was. I mean, just it's hard to describe how excited the town was, and this feeling of pride that they had about this happened here. And it's a town now of 20,000. Back in 1937 was only like 11 or 1,200 people. So many of the people are new to the town, but they still felt like, well, this is our town and it happened here. And if I could fast forward with the illustrated children's book, which is already being used in the fourth grade, you can see, and the teachers tell me, the kids feel a lot of pride because they've seen the buildings. The buildings are still here. The old town hall is here. The church is still here. The parsonage is here. The general store is here. So all those are part of the story, and they can see that, and that's their town that stood up to these Nazis in 1937.
And Ed, if I can ask you to kind of give maybe the Reader's Digest version, though, of what actually happened in 1937. In other words, your town was, well, why don't you take it from there?
Sure. Well, geographically, about 75, 80 miles from New York City, which was where the Bund was located at this point. And there was a direct rail line coming up here back in those days. Small farming community that we say was pretty much off the beaten path, very knocked down by the Depression. And unknown to anybody, in September, somebody bought, I think it was like, now I forgot the amount, but 20 acres, 25 acres of land that was undeveloped farmland, nothing unusual about that. And then as November of 37 came about, early November, representatives of this German American Bund group who would dress in this Nazi regalia, and the word is they came up on their long black Mercedes-Benz and drove into town and wanted to talk to the leaders in town about what a great idea having this camp would be. And that had been their experience in the 20 or 24 camps that existed. Because again, being the Depression, this meant people coming into your town, they'd have to buy your farm goods. They might need labor, whether it's maintenance, building, whatever. But the people or the leaders in the town, specifically these two ministers, Lindsay and Manley, and in my book, I only talk about Lindsay to try to keep it simple, if you will. They basically said, this is not good. They both were educated or were graduates of Yale Divinity School. And so we sensed they were a little more worldly. And they basically said, this is not a good idea to happen in this town. And they were being lobbied, literally, by this group, came up a couple of times to convince them that this is a good thing to do. And what they did is worked with the first selectman at that time. His name was Ed Core. And they said, we should have a town meeting to talk about this. That had not really happened anywhere else. And although we love to talk about our New England heritage and town meetings, that's what democracy is all about. If you can get 15 people to show up, you're thrilled, right? And the town hall at that time probably could have held 25 to 30 people. But as the word spread about this town meeting, which followed soon after they did their Sunday sermons about why this should not happen, why we can't let this group come here. They not only, there were too many people to go in the town hall, so that's when they moved down to the church and filled the church up. And what they had come up with is this idea that if we have zoning, which they did not have zoning at that time, we can say in the zoning laws that certain things are prohibited. And they were smart enough not to say we're going to prohibit them because we don't want Nazis. Because as you know, you try not to make laws about a particular person or a particular group of people. But in those zoning laws zoning regulations they came up with, it basically said you cannot train people in the military arts unless it's been condoned by the US government. And that was the kind of, straw that broke the camel's back. And that's, there's some more things that happened, but basically the German American Bund realized it's not going to happen here.
Well, it's very exciting when I watched the film was to see, it was that one woman who was around at the time.
Right, Jenny Hinman.
Yeah, very exciting, and she must have been overwhelmed by the story when it was told. I'm sure she was at the opening too.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're talking about who was alive at that time,
Right.
Lillian Wentworth, right?
Right.
Yes,
That's
Lillian. Yeah.
but beautiful story, and she was there. You know, that was great.
Right.
So fast forward.
If you don't mind, there's a cute story. As Scott Sniffen, who did the movie, we were putting articles in the paper asking anyone has an oral history to share, please let us know. And we knew about Lillian because we knew about her thesis, her master's thesis, back from 37 or 38, I guess 38. And but we didn't know if she was alive or not. So one day Scott gets this phone call, and the woman says, "I'm Lillian Wentworth." And it's like Scott is like, "Oh, that's fantastic." And she said, I think I have a story to tell. So with that, Scott is looking all over his office for his appointment book, to schedule it. And she finally says, "You better hurry up. I'm 99 years old." So obviously they were able to schedule it, but and she made it. She died soon after that, but she was definitely thrilled by the movie.
Fast forward, if you would, Stephen. We'll be with you in just a second. Our second guest is kind of, we're going to have you, I want to put you in the waiting room, Stephen, or you can just kind of disappear on us a little bit, or you can hear the rest of the story. But there he goes. Okay. But sorry for the interruption, Ed, but just in the remaining time, fast forward then to the fact that now you have your first film, very exciting, first film you ever did in your life. All of a sudden now you decide you want to become an author. How'd you get from the film to the book?
Well, again, as I mentioned, the inspiration came at the Holocaust Museum and going through the bookstore. And like you said, I'd done writing, not as much as you, because, the yearbook, we didn't have to write as much as you did on mental pablum. We just had to work with pictures. But I sort of had it in my head. And, one evening, early morning, I got up and I wrote like half of it. I mean, it was in my head and I wrote it down. But then it was a struggle to figure out how do you get published. And I tried going let's say the more normal route of finding an agent or a publisher. But then I just had this feeling, if I don't get this done, because it was frustrating, I wasn't hearing a lot back. And I'm just going to self-publish. And it's pretty amazing what Amazon provides these days.
I was going to say that, exactly.
They really, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things you can say about Amazon plus and minus, but in terms of getting more people over the hump of finding a publisher and doing it yourself, it's pretty amazing. And how the word can travel through Amazon as well as Facebook and everything like that. So I'll be real honest. I had the idea of an illustrator.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found a woman who is very talented here in this part of Connecticut. We worked together, I thought, very well. And she got into the storyline. And so I had all the pieces. And but I found, and COVID was happening. I said, well, I got plenty of time. All the pieces were together in August. I said, all right, all the excuses are gone. Publish, the illustrators illustrated, the words are done. You got to pull the cord. And I couldn't do it. There's something about putting yourself out there with your words and saying, okay, this is my work now. And that was an impediment for me. Luckily, I was with my son, and he said, my company's giving me a sabbatical. I said, well, what are you going to do on your sabbatical? He said, well, I'm really not sure. I'm in the process of moving from one house to another. I said, well, how would you like to learn about electronic publishing with Amazon? And he said, well, I've always wondered about that. I said, well, I got a project for you.
Great.
So
wow.
He took me over the threshold, if you will, and made it happen.
And two final questions about the book, Ed. Number one, if folks want to get a copy of it, themselves, best bet is to do what?
Well, definitely Amazon. So the real, I don't think we've said the name of it, is
Okay.
Lois's Story. And again, it's based on a real woman named Lois Lindsay Brown, who ended up living pretty close to your area, southwest Virginia is where her family moved. She was the oldest daughter of the minister, and a very inspirational woman when I met her and got to learn more about her life. So it's Lois's Story, a young girl's inspiration helps to stop hate and fear.
And the final question, Ed, is after this book now, we went through a whole bunch of different careers. What's next for Ed Edelson? Do we have our next book, or are we going to see the show version of this, or what's going to happen next?
Well, I have a dream. I don't know if I'll be able to pull it off, but that time that I was first selectman uh, taught me a lot about people in terms of some of the adventures I had as first selectman, the various things we worked on. Brought out some of the good in people, but a lot of the, we've got rough politics in Washington, D.C. I can't tell you how many times people would say to me, Southbury is just like a mini version of what happens in Washington, D.C. In terms of the politics. And so some of that is for my own psychological benefit to work through, what happened and to kind of get it out of me. And some of it is, I think some of the stories are pretty interesting. So we'll see if that's the next one.
Okay, well, looking forward to it. And you got to promise that when we have the next book ready, we'll have a guest on Blaine's World. And maybe I'll catch you at the, if we ever have something called reunions,
Right.
Maybe I'll catch you at the 55th or whatever. Were you at the 50th?
Yes, that's one that was on Long Beach. I don't think you were there. Yeah.
Right, I was. So you must have been in one corner. I was in another corner. But anyway, we'll hopefully get together in the 55th. Okay, buddy?
Sounds good. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Great seeing you. And I'll hopefully be in touch with you again.
All right.
Okay,
Now I'm going to leave.
Ed kind of works his way out of the studio. I'm going to try to find our next guest, and there he is. Perfect timing. Hey, Stephen. And before I introduce you, let me just mention to our listeners that you listen to WPVM, and WPVM's mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogues to inform and entertain. The station provides the medium for artists, businesses, community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voices on live radio. Listeners are invited to help support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution. You can do so by going to the website, wpvmfm.org, and looking at the donate option on the upper right-hand side. It's now my pleasure to introduce my second guest, a friend of mine, Stephen Forbus. And Stephen is a community development consultant, as we'll see in just a second. But before we begin, Stephen, why don't you wave to all your fans and friends on Facebook? So you can everybody's watching you. Hopefully at least Bill Lewis will be watching. So at least we get Bill to watch. And that'll make our day. I should mention that Stephen is a community development consulting, helping nonprofit organizations with capacity building, organizational development, fundraising, and marketing. He has 20 years of experience helping nonprofit organizations create programs, develop partnerships, and develop sustainable revenue. He's been married for 32 years to his high school sweetheart and the girl next door, where they now live as a neighbor of mine in Morris Hill with their 2 dogs, a cat, and 4 chinchillas. And
yes,
Stephen, this is so cool being with you, because I've known you, must have been 20 plus years from our mutual days in Bucks County. And it's kind of interesting how you were in Bucks County. How'd you wind up in Morris Hill, North Carolina?
well, that was by choice. Just a real quick love story. My wife and I were next door neighbors, so I married the girl next door. We were high school sweethearts, but before we were sweethearts, we were best friends. And we spent a lot of time together just hanging out and talking. And one day her sister invited us to go play in the snow in the mountains. And in Southern California, where we grew up, if you want to play in the snow, you have to drive to it. And so we drove up into the mountains and we went sledding. And it was the first time I'd ever put my arms around her as we went down a hill on a sled. And we both say that that was the moment we began to fall in love. So our romance began in the mountains. And she has family in North Carolina. So it's been her dream for many years to move to the mountains of North Carolina. And we just decided that we wanted to do that. So it was 2017, we made the decision, all right, let's work towards that goal. And we had a 5-year plan and we did it by 2020. So we relocated here, found a job. There was the home that we found first. And the rest is where we are now. It's absolutely beautiful and we love it.
Okay, well, I'm so happy to have you as a neighbor, even though because of COVID, we met once when we were in Nashville. I got to meet you downtown, and I look forward to seeing you sometime in person again if we ever get, beyond this COVID. But what I think is interesting about you, there are many things interesting about you, Stephen. One of the things is that I know you as a nonprofit consultant. And just
Yes.
to go back a little bit, the very first time I think I ever saw you or worked with you, I was so impressed with you that you ran this whole event for a mutual friend of ours as a fundraiser to help him get over some very expensive medical bills. And I said, wow, that was pretty impressive that, you know, there's guys such as you to pull that all together. How'd you get that background? In other words, where'd you grow up as a kid?
Okay, so I grew up in Southern California, and I have a sister who is developmentally disabled. So I actually grew up volunteering at her school from a very young age. I was 5 years old when I started volunteering there, and playing with kids that could be played with, and helping push wheelchairs to the lunchroom. And I even rode my bike there during the summer, during summer months, just to volunteer and spend time at my sister's school. So I grew up working off and on, volunteering for this nonprofit organization, and I actually wanted to get into ministry. So I went on to a Bible college, and I was fully intent on doing that. My wife and I were, I was already enrolled in seminary when my wife and I were in a car accident in '95, and I had to leave school. I had to go back to work full time. We didn't realize it at the time, but her injuries were, well, she is still disabled. We'll just put it that way. So long-term effects, life-altering effects. But I had continued to just spend time as a volunteer working with different organizations and nonprofits. And I was in information technology for a major international law firm. And after our Y2K project, they offered me a job working for our London office, but working out of Philadelphia. And I opted for a buyout package instead, and went to the pastor at my church and said, I can volunteer full time for the next 6 months. What do you want me to do? And I just applied experience that I had working with as a volunteer to being a professional director of development, and I had success with it. That's how it got started.
We were talking just before about the fact that I guess I first got involved with you, is that it was really cool. You just volunteered. We have this mutual friend, and he was seriously injured, and we were looking to raise money for him, and everybody's going to do their individual thing. And I'm sure it was you. You came up with the idea that rather than just everybody doing 27 different things, you put it all together. And describe what you actually did at that time, if you can.
Well, yeah. So there were a lot of people who wanted to help
Right.
Our friend Bill, and I don't know if I have his permission to talk about what happened to him, but yes, he was very seriously injured while he was a volunteer at his church. And so I got a group of friends together, about 16 of us on the committee, and said, let's do a dinner and auction and big fundraising event. Now, the Boy Scouts was doing a fundraising event. They did a spaghetti dinner, and the bank where his wife worked did a fundraising event. But I wanted one where we could actually go ahead and get sponsors and really raise a lot of money. So I reached out to a friend of mine at the Center for Independent Living, which was a nonprofit that helped people with disabilities. And I asked if they could be a pass-through organization so that we can get actual sponsors to give, and it be given to a 501c3 and it be tax deductible. Well, that helped us raise about $20,000 in sponsorships. And we had a ton of people who wanted to come out to this event. I remember telling Bill's family, you need to buy your tickets. This event's going to sell out. We had, I think Bill said 360 people at the event. It was very crowded, standing room only. All of the seats were full. And we did a live auction. We did a silent auction. I got to host as an auctioneer, which is one of my favorite things to do in fundraising. And we, as I said, we got it sponsored, and we actually got into USA Today. That was an article there was an article written about the support that he got, and we raised almost $60,000 in it. And that was just 10 weeks after his accident.
And what I liked so much about that event, Stephen, is that like a lot of people, I was kind of looking at as to how to help out, just as one person. But I don't know, well, I do know how you did it. Did it with a lot of hard work. But you got members of the community, and I was on that committee, and it was just a tremendous community because nobody, it wasn't an ego thing. It was just all for one purpose, help this one person. And somehow you ran the meetings, and we'd meet, I don't know, every couple of weeks, whatever, or eventually every week. They were just really good meetings. I'm not a big fan of meetings, but
Right.
to your credit, they were really good meetings. And how do you pull that off? Even to get 16 people from the community, different backgrounds, different, experiences. How do you bring them all together?
Volunteers don't want to have their time wasted.
Right.
And one of the things that I teach my nonprofit clients is how to make sure that they get the most out of their volunteers by being very careful about the type of jobs that they give them and not let them just spin their wheels. So I was very proactive in coming up with agendas and sharing with people the different things that we could do. There were specific people that were in charge of marketing and specific people in charge of ticket sales, and everybody could help with finding auction items. And so the meetings were just run like I was running one of my nonprofit organizations, and saying, these are the 12 steps that we need to take in order to make this a very successful event. I reached out to a caterer. The caterer was able to do it in his hall, and he only charged us $5 a person. The printing was free. Everything was free except for that $5 cost for food. So the entire event was very, very inexpensive. And of course, it was very, very helpful. It helped get him a van, a handicap accessible van, a ramp to his home, which the Boy Scouts put together. But I know that we helped raise money towards that, and to do some work in his house to make it ADA compliant, that type of thing. So
I guess that's one of the secrets, Stephen, I guess, of your success. We'll talk about working with other nonprofits, but I guess one of the keys is you seem to have the ability to get a lot of people to buy into like the overall mission, as opposed to just a few people. I guess the key is as many people as you can get to buy into it. It's going to make a more successful event or nonprofit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't want to take a whole lot of credit with Bill's case, because Bill was the reason people wanted to help. I mean, they were bought in because this was an all-around great guy who himself was a volunteer at a lot of different organizations, from the American Red Cross to the theater company at his school and Bucks County SIFE program. I mean, he did a lot of good in the community. So it wasn't a lot of effort to be able to say, hey, let's help him out. But when it comes to an organization like the orchestra, it was difficult for the orchestra to be able to try to raise money to entertain people. I mean, it wasn't real sexy. So I said, what else are you doing? Are you doing anything with youth or children? And they said, well, we have a youth in the arts program. So we raise money once a year in order to promote youth in the arts. And we actually do a composition that is written by youth. And I said, well, then that's it. That's your next event. That's what people are going to buy into. So we did a youth in the arts, wine, cheese, and auction is what it ended up being. So yes, I find ways of being able to communicate what it is that the nonprofit organization is doing in a way that finds buy-in with donors.
Well, even as you say that, Stephen, I'm shaking my head in terms of thinking about some of the works I've done with nonprofits, especially theater nonprofits. And you're absolutely right that it's not little kids, it's not dogs or cute little dogs or something, so people can support certain things very easily. Other things, and you gave a great example, like an orchestra, it's cool, it's good, but it's not a compelling story to some people, so right. I guess that's what you help people do. You help them find that compelling story.
Yes, exactly. If you don't mind, I'll give you one great example.
Yeah.
I was helping this organization in Bucks County that was a ministry that had been established by a church, but they were a separate 501c3, and they were a house that ran a lot of programs called Ivan's House. And I showed up to a board meeting. They wanted to talk to me about what they did and how I could help them. And I asked them, what do you do? And the very first board member said, well, it's hard to explain what we do. There's just a lot that wouldn't get done if it were not for us. And they told me about a family that had a house fire and about how they organized support for that family. And they told me about a coat drive and providing coats for middle school students that didn't have coats during the winter. And they had a food pantry. And after about 10 minutes of these stories, I said, you mobilize aid for families in crisis. And they went, yes. That's it. That's who we are. And it became part of their mission statement and their tagline, and it became something that we could use to market who they were. So I took one of their stories and I went to a local hospital. People here in Asheville would know Mission Health, but they're in Bucks County with St. Mary Medical Center. And I told them in a letter that there was a woman who wanted to see her doctor, and this organization provided volunteers that provided transportation to the elderly in order to go grocery shopping or see their doctor, that type of thing. And so she went to see her doctor, and it turned out she had a blood clot. It was a life-threatening situation. And so she wrote us a letter that she said, I know you're called Faith in Action. You should be called Angels in Action because you saved my life. And I sent this, just 3 lines of that story, to the hospital, and I asked them for $5,000 to sponsor the program. And they wrote me back an email. They said, we loved your letter. We want you to rewrite it. Ask for 10,000, not 5. So yeah, that's very important to be able to market to what donors need. And donors need to know that their contributions are going to make a difference.
Well, you're raising a really good point there, Stephen, in terms of when some people might think about a fundraiser, you say, well, you and I have talked about this off the air. Well, we need to have a fundraiser, we need to raise money. And the reality is that's just one thing a nonprofit has to do. If all they strive for, and we've talked about this, it's just to raise funds for one event, they're perhaps missing a big part of the picture. Would you say so?
Absolutely. When I very first began as a consultant, it was 2003. I wanted to just help raise money for nonprofit organizations that couldn't afford to hire their own director of development. And what I soon realized is that there was a lot of infrastructure that nonprofit organizations needed in order to be successful at raising money. And so I had to spend time researching and studying and educating myself on how to do that. And of course, I have a lot more experience now than 2003 when this started, but a lot of nonprofit organizations don't have the capacity to raise money, and they don't have the money to build capacity. So someone like me can come along and help them get there with board development and learning how to run committees and learning how volunteers can work more effectively and smartly. They need a strategic plan. And there's 3 real simple essentials that nonprofit organizations need. They need to know who they are, which is their mission, where they're going, which is their vision, and how to get there, which is their strategic plan. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations have goals with no plans. And so I tell them, and this isn't something that I created, there's a French philosopher last century that said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And I help them go from having a wish to having a plan so they can get to their goal.
Well, another thing I think you probably, I know that you help organizations with, is that when you approach them or when you start working with them, they have 20 different people from 20 different, backgrounds. But very few, I imagine, have actually been trained, and we'll talk about it, is there a process in becoming a board member? It's something that, sometimes you get honored to be a board member, but you have no idea what you're doing. Do you find that the case?
Yes. And so part of board training is being able to give every board member a job description and give them a responsibility and then hold them accountable for that responsibility. And I actually encourage board members to sign a letter of commitment that says, this is what I'm planning on doing. I'm going to show up to 80% of the meetings. I'm going to be involved in at least one committee. And not everybody can do fundraising, but maybe they have an interest in marketing, or they have an interest in infrastructure building, or they have an interest in some other aspect of being able to build an organization, but it's not necessarily asking for money. So I can work with the introverts and have them do something that is going to be program or partnership related. And then I can work with the extroverts and really help them understand how to do fundraising effectively.
Well, it's funny. I've never seen that in all the years I've been on boards. I've never seen a document, that I had signed, or even, very rarely do I even get a job description. You just come to a meeting and do your thing. Do you help also boards, so you help train them in terms of what they have to do. Do you help also organizations find board members? And let's talk a little bit about that process. Can you
how to find board members, how to do leadership development. And that really begins by being able to reach out through your sphere of influence. Everybody has a sphere of influence, and you have multiple spheres of influence within an organization. So you have however many staff members and the 10 best friends that they have, and then your board and the 10 best friends that each board member has, and clients and donors and volunteers, and then just be able to have a consistent marketing message and a consistent mission statement that says, this is who we are and what we do, and try to find like-minded people. And then part of leadership development is finding, let's say you have donors that have been consistently giving, being able to task somebody with going to them and explaining to them what it means to be a board member, and asking them to come and visit a board meeting as a guest to see if it's something they would be interested in. And some will come and say, well, now, I really don't want to do all of that, but I'll volunteer on this committee of yours. And just trying to get somebody involved that way is a great way of being able to develop future leadership. And I actually have events, community appreciation dinners or community building events that will help you cultivate your donors and your future leaders by doing that same strategy.
Stephen, in your opinion, what makes a good board member?
Someone who has passion for the organization and is willing to help. Not necessarily somebody who has experience or someone who has a thick Rolodex or somebody who, has money, although that does help, but somebody who has passion and a willingness to help. That's a good board member. And if you can have those two things, then you can train them to do the rest. If you do have somebody who has great connections, obviously you want to be able to teach them how to use those connections in a way that isn't going to belittle their friendships or make people run and hide when they see them walk into a room. I tell my boards all the time, you do not want to be hitting people up or begging for money. You want to be giving people opportunities to share in something that's important to you. And so board development training is also helping board members understand what's at stake in talking to somebody, what the upsides are, what the benefits are, and do it in a way that is going to be able to retain friendships and give people opportunities to do something that may be helpful to the organization.
I love what you said there. I'm going to ask you to repeat it. I have to think about this too. So rather than ask people, for example, for money or for gifts or for fundraiser, I love how you described it. What did you say? Give them the opportunity to?
Giving them an opportunity to share in something that's important to you. By giving somebody an opportunity, you've already won. You've given them something that they didn't have before. There was a book that I read many, many years ago called Fundraising for Social Change by Kim Klein. And I don't know what version it's on now, but I read this book 20 years ago. And one of the things that she talks about is an example of the passing the plate in church. She said the plate has passed to everybody, whether they've just been laid off from work or they just already gave $50,000 to help pave the parking lot. Everybody is given the same opportunity, regardless of their status, their position in life. And fundraising requests are an awful lot like that. Don't spend other people's money. Let them decide for themselves. All you have to do is give them an opportunity. And if they say no, you haven't lost anything, because at least now they have the opportunity. And the more times that we can do that, the more successful we're going to be at being able to raise funds for nonprofits.
Stephen, taking your words, I'm going to give you now the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the other nonprofits you've helped. For example, you can talk about back in Bucks County, Pennsylvania area, and then we'll talk maybe about North Carolina, time permitting. But give us some examples of some other things you've done with nonprofits.
So I've helped organizations from New York to California, 9 or 10 states in between. And I've helped shelter battered women, feed the homeless. I've volunteered myself for feeding the homeless, creating after-school programs, starting memory cafes for people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, intergenerational programs with daycare students and senior centers, cleaning up the environment, rescuing dogs and cats. I've done a lot. And I've been able to help over 100 different nonprofit organizations. And I spend a lot of time with each one. So it's really been gratifying over the years to say vicariously, I've been able to do so much. If I can give you a specific example, There was a senior center in Reimersburg, Pennsylvania, a little bitty town of 915 people. And their senior center was only 31 people. And I went looking for a rural senior center that I could help. And I called them up on the phone and I said, I'd like to write this grant for you that the State Department of Aging is providing, because I know that they want to give money to smaller towns as well. And I helped create programs for them that brought in the American Foreign Legion, the YMCA, the local hospital, to create programs, yoga instruction, computer training. We did paint and new tables and chairs, and all of this was with a grant that I wrote for them that got them $50,000. They didn't know anything about it. I created all of the programs for them. I helped reach out and get the money for them. I helped create the partnerships for them, and they were able to benefit from all of that.
So the interesting thing about that story, if I can just add, when you first told me about it, I was really impressed in that, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the one you never actually went to physically?
Correct. They were in Western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, and I did all of that remotely from Skype.
And I think that's one of the cool things now, not a good thing necessarily, but because COVID, you can still work with organizations. So when you've been doing this all your life, without necessarily having to be there personally. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I said, just last week I was consulting with an organization out of Houston that provides inner healing. Next week I'll be talking to a group out of Australia. They put, it's a religious organization. They put audio Bibles together, like little mini iPods, and they send them all over the place. And so, no, I'm not going to go to Australia in order to talk to them. I can do all of that remotely. Organizations in California, Illinois, Alabama, Kansas, I've done all of that remotely.
You have a favorite type of organization you like to work with?
Yeah, I have a passion for what I call Matthew 25 ministries. That's a story in the Bible where Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And there's a list there of the different types of people who really need help. And he concludes by saying, when you've done this to the least of these brethren of mine, you've done so to me. And so that's really a passion of mine, to do that type of thing. One of my long-standing clients was called Welcoming the Stranger, and they took their name out of that passage in the Bible, and they did ESL classes for immigrants and refugees, also citizenship training and computer training for immigrants and refugees. So those are the things that really, I have a great passion for. But again, I've been able to do so many different things in, working with the arts, working with animal rescue, working with environmental cleaning. Those are obviously things that spark my interest as well. I won't raise money for politicians. I'm I have to have a line somewhere.
Okay. Stephen, if folks want to get in touch with you or also to find out more about you, what's the best bet?
The website is NNPRC, that's National Nonprofit Resource Center. So, or Nancy Robert Paul Charlie.org. And there you can find, there's resources. So there's a resources tab of things that you can use right now with your board or nonprofit to find ways of growing. There's a list of my services on the website. Or if you wanted to talk to me, my contact information is there, or you can click on book an appointment from the homepage to schedule time to meet with me one-on-one via Zoom.
Okay. And again, I'll compliment you also on that fact, because I've looked at your website and without even contracting for your services, just a lot of really good useful information. So nice job on that. I'll ask you, Stephen, when last time the website was?
NNPRC.org.
Okay, I'd like to thank Stephen, you for being my guest this second half hour on the Blaine's World Show. Also to Ed Edelson, my guest on the first half hour. And I'd also like to thank Amy Prisnash, my producer. Look forward to having you join me next Wednesday here on WPVM at 9 a.m. and we'll see you then. Thanks, Stephen.